Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the U.S.-Japan Research Institute seminars on Internet government in Asia, a new focus for U.S.-Japan collaboration. I'm Katsuichi Uchida, President of USJI and also Vice President of Waseda University. USJI is a non-profit research institute in Washington, D.C. Established in April 2009 by leading Japanese universities now managed by 8 universities, namely Dosha, Keio, Kyoto, Kyushu, Tsukuba, University of Tokyo, Ritsumeikan, and Waseda universities, and financially supported by business societies of both United States and Japan. The mission of USJI is to promote policy-related research to nurture young researchers and to formulate a community of researchers and policymakers. With regard to research activities, USJI focuses on 3 main topics, such as environment and energy, security issues, and regional collaboration. USJI organizes a few research teams, consist of researchers from both US and Japan, and they publish research results and hold seminars. USJI usually holds week-long seminars twice a year, in March and September here in Washington, D.C., and occasional seminars once or twice a month, and sometimes held a symposium in Japan. For example, in last December, USJI held a symposium titled The First Year of the APEC Administration and Direction for the Future, Diplomacy and Security Strategies. Keynote speakers were former U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Michael Amakos, and Japanese Defense Minister by Itsunori Onodera. Also, from last year, USJI started Japan one-on-one seminar series with US Asia Institute, US-Japan Council, and National Bureau on Asian Research to discuss fundamental socio-economic and political issues of current Japan in order to provide useful information to people in Capitol Hill. With regard to the details of our activities, please check our website. This week, we've held 10 different events covering a wide range of topics. Among them, Event 10, Sino-Japan Dynamics and Implication for the US-Japan Alliance, is co-hosted by National Bureau for Asian Research. Event 9, Building the Tomodachi Generation, is co-hosted by US-Japan Council and the Washington Center. USJI is very pleased to collaborate with these organizations. In this particular this particular issue, our topic is Internet governance in Asia, a new focus for US-Japan cooperation. I think this is quite interesting topics and quite new in this USJI week. And I think this is very important for the future of US-Japan relations. And we are very fortunate to have a group of distinguished speakers. And I'm quite sure today's discussion will be very stimulating and will produce fruitful and productive results. And before introducing moderator Professor Foster, I would like to ask to receive your permission of videotaping these seminars and open to public through internet with some additions. Thank you for your permissions. Professor Foster, please.
Good morning. I want to thank Professor Uchida for a great introduction. And I want to thank you all for showing up. I mean, with the snow and everything. You know, we're used to snow in Tokyo. We had about a foot of it 10 days ago. But I know it's a very rare occurrence here in Washington. So I really appreciate that you came. I must confess, when we decided to do this, I was pretty worried. I mean, not that people aren't interested in the internet and internet governance. I mean, there's a huge community in Washington that are thinking about and tackling some of those issues. In fact, we're delighted to have two of the leading folks that are doing that on the panel. And it's not that, you know, U.S.-Japan relations is not very much a part of the intellectual and political discourse here in the Capitol. But the fact is when you have those two subjects together, they tend to cancel out. I mean, the internet guys say, well, that's cool, internet, but they're going to talk about Japan. And the Japan people say, whoa, I don't want to, what's the internet have to do with Japan? So that's it's kind of a little bit worried, but I think, you know, I took a look at the guest list and I see a few familiar faces, but I also see some new friends. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Hope it'll be very, very interactive. You know, in talking about the internet, often, again, you get people that say, well, you know, I'm not a hardware guy, or, you know, I barely know how to use my smartphone. What more do I need to know about it? The fact is, though, I mean, internet is much more than a technology. It's a social and it's an economic phenomenon that's becoming deeply embedded in our society and in our daily lives. And that then becomes intrinsically a political set of issues. And we're going to be talking about a political set of issues when we wed together those two words, internet and governance. U.S.-Japan relations, on the other hand, everybody knows about that. We're going to talk about rice, and we're going to talk about beef, and maybe we'll talk about insurance. Anybody here from the insurance industry? You know, those are kind of the typical issues that tend to divide us in the political area, economic area. Those are the ones that tie us up in the TPP talks, which again were fairly rocky and unproductive in Singapore over the past weekend. And of course, you know, if we're not going to talk about economics, why don't we talk about security? And then we talk about Okinawa, we talk about some of the other issues there. Many issues to talk about in the context of U.S.-Japan relations, but why do we talk about the internet? I hope when you leave here, hour 15 minutes, hour and a half from now, you get a better sense of why we need to talk about it and what we might do together, not just in a bilateral context, but in Asia. Let me just get a general sense of where you guys are on this. How many people have heard of the U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue? Tom, you don't count. And Raina, you don't count either. 1, 2, 3. U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue is, quite frankly now, the major economic dialogue between Japan and the United States in the absence of any other real bilateral engagement between Japan and the United States in the economic field. Yes, TPP is a separate track. The Internet Economy Dialogue is now 4 years old. It's going to be meeting a week from now in Tokyo. It'll be the 5th meeting of the U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. And right at front and center of it is going to be these issues of internet governance. And, you know, we talk about internet governance, and I know people who know me and say, geez, you give him the mic and he's never going to get to the panel. Well, only 3 more minutes, but let me just tee this thing up. We're facing a very dynamic, a very important, almost I would argue a turning point in terms of the future and the vitality and relevance of the internet. I mean, first of all, I think I can't probably repeat it enough for an American audience, but you guys got to get it. These NSA revelations have really fundamentally undermined the trust and the capacity of the U.S. To lead on international internet issues. This is really something that needs to be addressed again and again and again in an international context. As I read the U.S. press from far away in Tokyo, everybody seems to focus on it in terms of a national security context or in terms of an individual context. I don't want my phone records being reviewed by governments. Yeah, but the fact is that the internet is essentially global, and our companies that offer internet services are essentially global service providers. And in that particular context, the operations of the internet and the integrity of the internet are very much threatened by these kinds of issues. Another big change and another big development in the context of the internet is increasingly the development of what might be called a Chinese internet. China has 650 million subscribers to the internet. They're moving to 1 billion. If you look at the top internet services companies these days, at least 4, sometimes 5 of them are Chinese. The Chinese alternative to Facebook, Weixin, now has 300 million subscribers. And in fact, you talk to people, it has more functionality than Facebook has to offer. And the thing that really kind of struck me is what the difference is now. I was paging through the World Economic Forum Information Technology Network Readiness Survey, which has been published every year since 2003. It's now in its 11th year of edition. This year it was sponsored by Huawei. Okay, typically European companies, the Siemens of the world, Japanese companies, the Sonys, typically American companies, Microsoft, Cisco have sponsored that. Chinese have arrived in a big way. And their view of the internet isn't necessarily coincident with our view. We tend to think about the internet as universal. We tend to think about the internet as global. We tend to think about rights to access. The Chinese think the internet is very, very important. And their companies are increasingly becoming innovative. As I said, they're moving towards 1 billion subscribers. The internet is very, very dynamic. It's huge. And the one thing the Chinese have mastered in the context of the internet is scale. That's the driving force for innovation, competition, and change on the internet is scale. When your market is big enough, you can make a huge difference. Yet from the Chinese perspective, the internet is not about universal values. The internet contributes to the maintenance of social harmony. And to the extent that the internet does not contribute to that, it needs to be controlled. Fundamental different point of view, and one I think that is very much at the core of what we mean and what we need to do about internet governance. So I think we need a lot of leadership. I think we need vision if we're going to preserve our values, and if we're going to preserve, I think, the vitality and integrity of the internet. And I think that's peculiarly and important and uniquely something that the US and Japan can do. Because in some respects, the battleground for the future of the internet is in Asia. That's where the growth is, that's where the innovation is going to be coming from, and that's where we have to be, or where the Japanese have to be, in kind of shaping and leading that particular environment. So I'm really happy to introduce very, very briefly the panel. My great colleague from Keio University, our Vice President for Collaboration, formerly our Dean at the School of Policy Studies on the Shonan Fujisawa campus, somebody I think who's very well known here in the States. He not only has an MBA from the Harvard Business School, he has a PhD from the Harvard Business School. So, and very much active in Japanese policy circles with respect to the internet, and now in his new role is beginning to think very, very deeply about the future of the global internet. I'm also pleased to introduce Dan Castro as a senior analyst with the Information Technology and Innovation Forum here in Washington. Previously he worked for GAO, and kind of combines what I think needs to be the future here. He has his BA in Foreign Service from Georgetown, great school, but he has an MA from Carnegie Mellon, focused on information security and management technology. And you know, one of the things that as a former diplomat, I felt very, very strongly, this is quintessentially an issue of international diplomacy. How do you knit together, not an international environment for the internet, my God, do we want to turn it over to the UN? But how do we create a transnational environment where all the elements of society, the multi-stakeholders, can have an opportunity to participate in this process. And finally, my good friend Andrew Harris with the Department of State, he's the guy that runs internet policy in the International Communications and Information Technology Office at the Department of State. Previously, a U.S. naval officer, so brings a lot of experience and unusual perspective to these issues. So I promise to be quiet for the rest of the discussion, and I want to turn it over to my good friend, Professor Kokudo. Thank you.
Do you really want to make that promise? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for gathering on this snowy day. As Jim introduced, my name is Jiro Kokuryo, and to the extent that I'm Vice President of Keio University, I'm part of the organization of this conference. So I thank you for that all. But today I'd like to talk as a researcher, and we work very closely with Jim on these issues. I basically come from the study of the business academic, looking at internet issues from the business opportunity perspective. At the same time, this internet governance has become such an important part of the entire picture, in the sense that without relevant and effective framework for internet governance, I think that they will have could have a negative impact on the possible innovation that we could have otherwise. So let me speak in that context. Now, I'm going to try to keep my talk short because I like to have as much discussion with the panel as with the audience. So let me just outline the sort of the gist of the slides that I have. As Jim mentioned, I think correctly portrayed, I think, I mean, objectively speaking, Asia is going to be the center of internet. I mean, for simple reason of number of people who use it. China already has 600 million users, and India is right behind it. Sorry to say, Japan is, I mean, in terms of penetration, Japan has very high percentage, but we only have 100 million, but we have 100 million. So adding those together, I mean, it will be natural to think that internet, Asia is going to be the center, at least a center, or perhaps the center of internet use globally. And as Jim correctly pointed out, with a background of huge usership, many of the Chinese service providers are becoming very successful in the internet business. The reason governance is important is, again, I think, as Jim said, if I'm going to repeat what Jim said, is that there are two competing perspectives on internet governance. If I may, perhaps this is an oversimplification, but one is global governance perspective versus national sovereignty control governance kinds of perspective. For among the countries that have led the introduction of internet, primarily the developed countries of the 90s and the very early 21st century, the US, EU, and Japan, and a couple of other countries have recognized the global nature, the borderless global nature of the internet, and have been embracing sort of more of governance beyond the international, the national government framework that because of such huge transporter communication and transaction and so forth, it has to have a global nature to it. Also, I think that there was this reality that engineers have been the leading group, that global network of engineers have actually been the key players who have actually managed, determined the nature of the network. On the other hand, I think there is a clear competing perspective now that internet, because internet has become so influential and has taken, has become such deep-rooted part of our societies, influencing the lives of ordinary people, a natural concern is is to maintain safety, security, and both in terms of ordinary people as well as the government structures among these countries. And in some ways, I think it would be natural to think that the governance structure should be based on the government, national government, and hierarchy of international, the government structure that had been the predominant form of governance, I guess, from the 17th century on, particularly in the Western world. So, but these sort of competition between the global governance perspective and the cyber sovereignty perspective have on and off clashed with each other, involving some of the critical issues like freedom of speech and so forth. And I think we are faced with what to do about these things. And of course, when it comes to things like privacy, there have been competing views. Of course, there are competing views between the European Union and the US also. So it's not that a simple dichotomy is too simplistic, and yet there are certain things that we need to resolve in order to really make use of this technology in the future. The reality in Asia is that in spite of such huge presence of usership in Asia, unfortunately there haven't been a unified voice from Asia, making contribution to the formation of global governance frameworks, and so that's one of the clear targets that we need to shoot for in making our efforts in forum like this. And my basic message is that cooperation between US and Japan on this field can contribute to the formation of to the adequate or right or correct or what do you call it more or better governance structure in the internet sphere in the future. Unfortunately, it's not that there hasn't been any attempts at that. A number of international efforts were made. More recently, a conference called WICIT in Dubai were held, trying to create a sort of international framework on this. It sort of broke down. That the proposal that were put on the table was to give ITU, the UN, ITU under UN should be the one, be given the bigger role in regulating the internet. So sort of trying to put the internet governance under the international sovereignty kinds of governance structure, and it pretty much broke down when some of the more some of the developed countries, including the U.S., have I don't know if this expression is correct, or walked away, or did not come to full consensus on this. So it hasn't been very effective. Another forum that I should mention is IGF, trying to create a lot of discussion and dialogue on this, but it has done. I do give a lot of credit to a lot of efforts that have been made around IGF, and there have been a lot of, I think, value in those discussions, but I haven't really come to solving the issues. So that's, I would like to have the panelists give comment on my evaluation on these two, but that's how we look at things. Now, so in a nutshell, I think since the commercial use of internet has begun in 1992, so in the 20 years, we have been quite successful to the goal of connecting the entire world. But the global nature of internet and the innovation and growth associated with it is at a great risk if we fail to solve the issue of governance. So I think it we have actually wired and the wireless connected the world, but we don't know. At this point in time, we don't really have a good structure to manage it. And there have been the why has the progress has been so slow is the one answer is that the traditional framework that we had to resolve these issues have not addressed the nature of internet, the global nature of internet. So the international sort of coordination among sovereign states kind of framework for coordinating international governance structure has not been able to address the overflowing global nature of the technology we have had. The tension is also between the state and the individual. When we think about things like privacy and we've been seeing a lot of breach of privacy kinds of things by the state also. The tension exists there. So in the 20th century framework, we could sort of frame things, international governance issues as sort of coordination among sovereign states and other sovereign states. But now the fact that the internet connects each individual creates tension in some other dimensions also. And as I said, the wicked sort of broke down in 2012, leaving, and as I said, essentially attempt at giving ITU the power to regulate has not been come into force, but that's not to say we have alternative effective means of governance. So we're still in search of the adequate way to do it. Mrs. Clinton made a statement in 2010 that internet should be free of state interference and that all individuals have the right to access the internet, which cannot be restricted by governments. This is essentially taken as the commitment that the US is not taking the cyber sovereignty approach, but is pursuing more sort of multi-stakeholder global governance structure. And while we at this time, while the Mrs. Clinton statement is in line with the majority sentiment of the Japanese society, actually of the Japanese official Japanese government stand. I'm afraid the U.S. government interest, so sort of there is skepticism against U.S. also, in the sense that I mean, while talking about global governance, in reality, U.S. is not giving up the control. It's not willing to give up the control of the internet. So while I portray this as a conflict between global governance and cyber sovereignty principles, perhaps we are talking about US internet versus China internet, and which one should we belong to. And that's probably not the way we want to frame this. Also, and I'm afraid that the US commitment to freedom was also hurt in a very bad way about the, with the PRISM and NSA and that sort of incidents. And I think U.S. needs to restore the trust on their sincerity to the commitment to freedom. And I would like to say this as a friend of U.S. If U.S.-Japan cooperation can help in any way to make that happen, that will be a happy goal. So Japan is, as I said, remains committed to the multi-stakeholder process of global internet governance and the principle of individual right to access of the internet. So I'm happy to say that Keio University has been pretty active in promoting this principle, and happily right now it is the official position of the Japanese government. We do that. We have an interest in that. Because we fundamentally believe in the market-oriented approach to internet governance, and with regulation as exception rather than the norm in the internet. So internet should basically be free. Of course, we need some, effective governance to maintain the security and safety, but the speech and knowledge. That sphere has to be basically free. So how can we guard the free and open internet? We can't simply say it should be left alone. But at the same time, how can we keep a free and an open internet? That's the question that we need to address in a serious way. And the assertion, I have to give credit to Jim on this, on phrasing this correctly, is that the changes in administration and governance of internet should be based as a consensus of all parties to the process and not simply the rule of the majority or unilateral assertion of cyber sovereignty. Perhaps this is a challenge, rule. You are mentioning about the voting system of the UN when you say the majority, right? Okay. So if it's simply a matter of voting in the UN Assembly, perhaps the outcome may be different. At the same time, I think while we are very much supportive, behind the democratic value, a simple majority rule perhaps is not the way to go. Or unilateral assertion of cyber sovereignty is these. But Jim, I think So we are against this. What are we for? Is the big question we need to answer. I think U.S. and Japan has a huge obligation to the rest of the world in building effective cooperation in such areas like the rules on the structure of privacy and sharing online content and network neutrality. I mean, some of the key issues of the internet. In order to maintain the free and open internet, we need to make sure that the societies that believe in these values come up with an effective multi-stakeholder framework so that our values can be maintained. And again, this I have to give credit, enormous credit, to Jim on the creation of the U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. Jim has been very successful in organizing industry organization and the government and these people to come together and create a series of joint statements that can be exchanged with our U.S. counterparts. And I'm very happy that academic institutions like Keio University have been able to give some sort of a platform for these institutions of sometimes conflicting interests to be on the same table and come up, come to a joint statement on some of the very sensitive issues, like privacy and cross-border data transfers. As Jim mentioned, there will be another round of dialogue very soon, and that will be a basis for discussion for the Rio summit in May, in April. So there will be a series of forums like that in the spring. So I hope today's discussion will contribute to somewhat in making these dialogues more effective. I don't think, I think we've been talking long enough, so I think we need to come up with something. That's where we are, and I very much look forward to having your input to this. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'd like to just jump queue a little bit and ask Andrew Harris from the State Department to come up. Andrew, as I said, is in charge of Internet policy at the State Department. Previously, he was in charge of the U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue and has been very, very active in figuring out ways, not only, as Jiro said, that the U.S. and Japan can talk together, but we can do something together. And I think really it's right in the context of the Rio Summit and other developments internationally with respect to this internet governance issue that the U.S. and Japan begin to talk about and articulate what we mean by a market-oriented approach and how we protect it. So thank you. Andrew?
Well, thanks, Jim. Thank you for the invitation today, and of course, thank you for your leadership in guiding the U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. Also, thanks to Professor Kokiro for the great presentation, and looking forward to this conversation today. So I'll start off by saying, without reservation, the U.S. and Japan see eye to eye on internet governance matters. Both governments are staunch supporters of the multi-stakeholder approach, and both recognize the tremendous economic and social value the internet has produced, thanks in large part to the multi-stakeholder internet institutions that have enabled its growth. The United States is grateful to have Japan as such a close partner, and it's reassuring to know that Japan shares the same deep commitment to preserving an open and innovative internet. As Professor Kokiro noted, there has been much activity in the internet governance space as of late. So I'll just say a few words about our present outlook from the U.S. government's perspective, and then offer some reflections on U.S.-Japan cooperation. The United States government welcomes the further evolution of inclusive global internet collaboration among all stakeholders. The U.S. government particularly supports the efforts of the multi-stakeholder institutions to better meet the needs of developing countries, and welcomes the efforts to make the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance, standards development, and policymaking more inclusive. So the fact that a broad coalition of internet stakeholders is working together to address the globalization of the internet institutions in the spirit and tradition of the multi-stakeholder model shows that this bottom-up process is working. That maturity reflects years of efforts by governments, industry, and technical experts, and civil society. By contrast, efforts to designate any multilateral or intergovernmental forum the central venue for internet governance, standards development, or policymaking would only set this substantial process back and shut out voices from industry, civil society, and the technical community, all of which are essential to the internet's continued success and growth, particularly within the developing countries. The United States cannot support any effort that would diminish the role of these vital stakeholders, and we feel confident that our partners from Japan stand with us on that. Now, I am pleased to suggest 3 upcoming critical international events where the U.S. and Japan can collaborate to ensure that the present system is maintained and strengthened. These are, in addition, of course, to the long-standing venues where we participate and discuss these issues, such as the Internet Governance Forum and ICANN. So the first upcoming venue is the ITU's World Telecommunication Development Conference, or WTDC, which will occur in late March in Dubai. Understanding that many countries face real issues associated with cost, access, and security, the US and Japan and the entire community must be proactive in working as a global community to find meaningful solutions. And this conference is the time when ITU member states come together to address development concerns, and so it poses a significant opportunity. Significantly, we're very pleased to have seen that Japan has introduced a very positive submission on cybersecurity capacity building to this conference. And we think that that submission sets an excellent early tone for the conference. The second venue immediately on the radar, which has been mentioned, is Net Mundial. This is the internet governance meeting that will be held in Sao Paulo, Brazil this April. We're pleased to note that a multi-stakeholder structure will plan and administer this meeting. While there's still much to be known about how the meeting will unfold and what the contributions to internet governance dialogue might be, we believe that the meeting holds promise in advancing the global community's approach to internet governance if the agenda is developed in a truly multi-stakeholder fashion, participation at the meeting is broad and inclusive, and any follow-on activity is guided by and ultimately supportive of the multi-stakeholder system rather than an intergovernmental mechanism of centrally imposed regulation and mandates. Finally, later this year, the ITU will gather member states for its quadrennial plenipotentiary conference in Busan, Korea. This will occur in October-November. We believe member states should devote considerable focus on what needs to be accomplished to increase affordable access to the communications networks and encourage the further deployment of these networks. The US and Japan, together with other partners, can cooperate closely to ensure the conference remains focused on these manageable and tangible tasks, seeking to avoid the possibility of divisive outcomes. The US and Japanese governments have an established mechanism to coordinate and manage a positive and effective approach to these upcoming events. It's been mentioned many times this morning, the Internet Economy Dialogue, and it will occur later in March, mid-March in Tokyo. This meeting will bring together senior officials from both governments and provide an excellent opportunity to reaffirm our core values and chart a path forward that will ensure optimal outcomes throughout this year. Each of the events that I've mentioned will be on the agenda, and so will provide an opportunity for our governments to collaborate closely. Some other good news for those of you attending this panel this morning is that 2 of the officials most important to that dialogue are here today. Dan Oates, my colleague from the State Department, and my friend Nakamizo-san from the Japanese Embassy. Both are vital in planning that event, so if you want to learn more, I encourage you to speak to both of them afterwards. So I know that my boss, Ambassador Daniel Sepulveda, who leads our ICT diplomacy efforts at the State Department, looks forward to traveling to Tokyo next month for the Internet Economy Dialogue and to continuing our fruitful relationship between the US and Japan. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very, very much, and particularly for kind of outlining what I think is going to be a very, very important agenda, basically with the March capacity building meeting in Dubai, the meeting in Sao Paulo, where in some respects the integrity of the multi-stakeholder process is a bit at stake. And it's great to know that ICANN and a lot of other organizations are involved actively in that process. And finally, the difficult kind of discussions that are going to take place in Busan in October when the ITU plenipotentiary meeting makes. That's going to be the first kind of big meeting since the Wicked Breakdown in December 2012, at which I'm not sure the U.S. and Europe walked away, but
we were there to the middle.
We were there, and made it very, very clear that we have a huge stake in the future of the internet, and we're not going to casually cede control to either a UN-based organization or to simply assertions of cyber sovereignty. So the guy who's going to put it all together for us now, from a kind of a outside government perspective, but also one firmly rooted in the industry, is Dan Castro. So Dan.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jim, for organizing this conference and Jared in doing this presentation. Since I'm not in government, I can be maybe a little more less diplomatic, let's put it that way, in my remarks. So I think you're absolutely right in what you said. Especially, I think we've seen a real shift in the past 8 months as a result of the NSA revelations. This has had an enormous impact in the United States, not only economically, but in international relations, especially on internet governance issues. Is that better? And we've seen especially a number of organizations like the W3C, IETF, that all signed on to this recent letter arguing for a change in the structure of internet governance. These were organizations that have historically been very friendly with the United States, even with ICANN, and making this link between the NSA and these revelations and how internet governance should occur in the future and the need for change because of this. But I would argue that the relationship here between the NSA activities and internet governance is spurious, that there's actually I'm not in any way a defender of what the NSA has done, but the US government specifically has not abused its unique status, its unique role in internet governance, especially in terms of the IANA contract that it has to facilitate the surveillance. It's done a lot of, I think, really bad things in terms of the surveillance, but there isn't a connection here on this issue, and I think that relationship shouldn't be used to drive this conversation. I think when we look at those details, the economic concerns and commercial interests outweigh the national security concerns there. What we've seen is that for a number of years, a lot of countries have been trying to get ICANN free of US oversight. This would likely radically transform the organization. Right now it's a US-based nonprofit. It's under US law. It has to operate under US contract laws. The concerns that many countries had about what might happen under an internet governed by the ITU, I think, apply in the context of an ICANN that doesn't have a special relationship with the United States or some other kind of protective role. I think long term, everyone agrees the US will need to step back. It is a global internet. The US has no right to have this special control. But right now, maybe the time isn't right. There's really kind of two views on what the US is providing in this role. One, countries that want to see a change maybe see the US more as a bully here. the U.S. exert some kind of extra control or influence. And the other side would see the U.S. as more of a bodyguard. It's protecting a vulnerable organization from being controlled or dominated by others. And I'm clearly in the camp of the latter. And I don't think ICANN should really be just kind of thrown to the wolves, so to speak. The idea that we need to restore trust in the internet doesn't mean we should turn it over to China. It doesn't mean we should turn it over to other countries that maybe won't keep it fully open in the way that we most have agreed we'd like to do. And these decisions about what to do with ICANN and the next steps, I think, should also be made in partnership with our allies that have worked with us on these issues for a long time. It shouldn't be a decision, I think, made unilaterally by the United States. It shouldn't even be made unilaterally, I think, by the administration. It should be up to public discussion within Congress as well. The changes that we've seen in ICANN, I think, over the past few years have also shown that this is an organization that's grown tremendously. So recently we've introduced these new global top-level domains. This has resulted in a huge influx of cash for ICANN. And when you think about organizations, organization theory, in government you have federal agencies and they have oversight by committees or legislators, and the oversight capacity there is you don't know exactly what's going on, but you control the budget, and there is a limit to the organization has to perform well, or they won't get a budget. With nonprofits, it's kind of the same thing in general. Nonprofits perform as well as they can with the money they get, and they only get money based on how well they perform. ICANN's a little unique because it has this special role and it's able to kind of extract money from the internet ecosystem through the domains and its other functions. So there's really kind of not the same kind of cap on how much funds it gets and what it does with that money. And this is important kind of from organizational theory and how ICANN will evolve. It's also important when we talk about, here's an organization that might be kind of free of this government backstop, government influence, that has a lot of cash and is really important. As one of my colleagues said recently, if they were a corporation, they would be ripe for takeover. This is what you would see, and you would expect that. So we need to think about that, I think, when we're thinking about how this might play out in the future and what we should be doing on these issues. The only other thing I want to mention is the characterization that, Jerry, you talked about of kind of global governance versus national sovereignty. I think this is exactly the problem that we've seen. I think you really put a fine point on that. And I think it's important when we're talking about these issues. Internet governance is such a broad term. There's different issues here, and so if we separate out issues like the basic architecture of the internet, that's where we do need more of global governance in the sense of it doesn't really work to have a global connected internet if we're not using the same standards. It doesn't work functionally, technically, at a technical level. But then when we start getting into some of these content issues, some of these other policy issues, social issues, that's where we do need a balance. And the U.S. policy of, I think, one of the problems with our strategy of calling for certain principles and values to be embedded in the internet is other countries disagree with us, and they have full rights to disagree with us and construct in a certain way an internet that fits their needs. So when we're talking about some issues like privacy or freedom of speech or decency, these are issues where countries are going to disagree, and we need to not think about a global governance structure for that, but have more national sovereignty. But then we also need this middle ground, where we're talking about more bilateral and multilateral agreements to cooperate on broad issues, where we do agree on the outcomes, we agree on the goals, but maybe we need more work on how do we actually want to implement those policies. So issues like spam and intellectual property. This is where we've had very good dialogue in the past. The East-West Institute, for example, put together a really interesting forum over the past few years between the United States and China on spam. This is an issue where the countries had never come together. They thought they could see eye to eye on this. And once they actually started sitting in rooms talking to each other, they realized they had a lot of common ground, shared priorities, and actually a lot that they could learn from each other. So certainly I think this isn't something that the U.S. can do alone. It needs to work with its allies, especially allies that recognize the commercial and economic benefits of the internet and want to maintain those benefits and the innovation that it spurs. and really work towards that goal and finding a global compact that recognizes both the need for global governance in some areas as well as national sovereignty and finding the right balance. I think that's going to be very tricky because we haven't done this before in many other forums. But that's one of the interesting parts about working in this area. So let me just stop there.
Okay, I want to thank Dan very well. I invited him with malice in the sense I thought he would give us a little intellectual clarity on some of these things, and I think he did. First of all, he brought up this whole issue of ICANN, and I think we kind of stayed away a bit from that, given the fact we're dealing with the internet governance, U.S., Japan, this dichotomy. People come from very, very diverse perspectives. ICANN is sounds very abstruse, but fundamentally it's just the place that manages the domain names and your IP addresses. You need to direct traffic on the internet. And the genius of it is that through a number of these root servers, 13 in all, even though there's actually thousands of them, when you send that email, it gets to me in Tokyo. And it gets to me very, very quickly, and it gets to me very, very reliably. That's the genius of the internet, and there are technical and engineering issues and standards issues that have been formulated over the last 20, 25 years to make sure that that happens. And I think Dan's point was very, very good. When we talk about internet governance in terms of freedom of speech or rights to access, these kind of global but also fundamentally value-laden kinds of contexts, we get very confused because the fact is that there's no consensus on values around the world, and trying to enforce one through the internet is probably a very, very kind of Don Quixote windmill type of prospect. But taking a nuts and bolts approach to how to deal with governance with respect to ICANN. ICANN, with these top-level domains, is getting a lot of money. There doesn't seem to be accountability and transparency in how this is being done. And also, quite frankly, when you're dealing with top-level domains, you get into branding and a whole series of national issues related to that. And so, if we can separate out some of these issues and begin to talk about them at different levels, ICANN being one set of issues, issues related to spam. I thought that was a great example where countries can have very, very common interests with respect to the global threat of spam, and you guys recognize it every morning when you open up your mailbox. Just check your junk filter sometime if you don't believe in spam. It's pervasive, and getting countries to sit down and figure out how we can cooperate together in that area. Dealing with cyber terror, dealing with cyber crime is another key area where I think countries can begin to come together. And I think one of the notions that have informed a lot of our bilateral and our multilateral dialogues have been to try to develop what we call habits of cooperation. In other words, if we can begin to cooperate and talk together and develop effective alternatives and initiatives with respect to concrete issues, we begin to get confidence that we can deal with some of these tougher issues. And I think that the wicket actually broke down because we bit off far more than we can chew. And I think taking this in small bites, if indeed we can begin that process in Sao Paulo and elsewhere, will be very, very important. I'd like to just give Jiro a few minutes to maybe respond to the comments, but then I'd like to open the floor to all of you and hope that we can use the last 20-25 minutes or so for a discussion. And believe me, please raise any and all questions because this is an issue where I think that everybody has something to contribute, and I think it's very unusual we get together people that are rooted in the Japan relationship, U.S.-Japan relationship, together with people that are coming from the perhaps the more technical commercial world of the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have a brief response to both Andrew's and Daniel's comments. That they were both great. And with regards to Andrew's comment, I fully agree that the inclusiveness is the key word. I think in my talk I didn't sufficiently address the needs of the developing countries to take part in this. I mean, clearly, it's not simply a matter of sort of the power game between U.S. and China. We need to address the need of the developing countries. At the same time, of course, the simple majority. I mean, that's where the dilemma is. The simple majority of country votes may or may not lead to the inclusive process that we really want to. So I think how we can really design the truly inclusive multi-stakeholder governance structure is one of the challenges that we need to address. As far as Daniel's point, I think, I mean, ICANN remains, I mean, maybe, perhaps this is too much of a detail to somebody who's not the internet experts, but I mean, ICANN remains to be one of the hot spots for discussion. This is not an official Japanese position. Personally, I've been relatively comfortable with the American. I mean, internet clearly came out of America. So I mean, it's the fact that ICANN has been part of American legislation, the corporate law I've been very comfortable with that. At the same time, I think the NSA revolution really shook that trust. So as far as the process is very transparent in the U.S., I think many in the world are relatively confident. I mean, we use the Facebook anyway, right? So there's no way to So as far as we can put trust on some of American institution or some other institutions of other countries, I think many of the people like myself will be right. So I think it's not a matter of whether jurisdiction falls, but I think it's the process of how we can monitor these. The process is the big question that we need to address. And I think I'll also take your point well that there may be. I mean, I think we cannot simply a simplistic dichotomy between sovereign and the global may be not the way to go. I mean, there are certainly. I think you mentioned the decency was one of the words that used. Attitude toward the exposure of the skin and that sort of things. We do need to address and honor some of the cultural diversity that exists in the world. We don't want to squash that with the internet. If that's the case, how do you draw the line? Is the next question that we need to address. I mean, can it simply be a matter of connectivity that we need to ensure, or should we? Since transborder transmission of data has become so prevalent, what should we do on matters like privacy? Is the hard issue that we probably need to somehow come to some kind of consensus. So let me. Sure.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions, just so that everybody is operating from the same sheet of music. ICANN is not a slogan from the 2008 Obama campaign. It actually refers to the International Corporation for Assignment of Names and Numbers. Basically, as I said, it gives you your IP address. Every device that you use has an IP address, and of course that relates to you or to your device as a unique individual. And domain names are simply the address book that tells computers where to send the information. And control of that is really at the heart of how the internet functions. And that's where a lot of concern has begun to be raised with respect to the U.S. role in doing that. You have to remember, though, that this thing started out pretty small. There was a guy called John Postal in the late 80s and early 90s that basically operated this out of his office at the university. And it was only in the late 90s when ICANN was formed that perhaps this began to take on a more formal structure. And I think we're actually at a point now where we really need to understand, evolve this organization a bit further. And I think Dan did a very, very good job of separating out what's essential from what is political, even though a lot of this stuff does have I think intrinsically, if you're talking about the tension between the state and the individual, a political dimension to it. So I'm going to throw it open to questions, concerns, statements. Please feel free. If you'd like to address them to a particular panelist, that would be fine. If you want to throw it to me and I'll throw it to someone else, that would also be good as well. So please. Be brave. Yeah, please. Could you identify who you are as well, your name and who you are?
I'm Scott Hanson. I'm from the Japan desk. Oh, can you hear me okay? Do you mind if I just speak from my seat? So my question is for Mr. Kokuyo.
Yes.
And
I think they need to record if it's.
oh, is this because you're recording?
Sorry to make you work.
Sorry, I need the exercise. So my question is for you, Mr. Kokuyo.
Yes.
You mentioned in your presentation that we're about to reach a point where the entire world is connected, but that this whole network was at risk due to the lack of global governance standards. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more. When you say the whole network is at risk, what is your perception of the threat? Thank you.
Thank you very much for. Thank you very much. Being sort of the promoter of business and innovation on the internet, my primary concern is over how how services, for example, can operate on a global basis. With a fragmentation, for example, of privacy policies, and if each company had to customize their service, comply with the privacy policy of each individual countries that are diverse, the cost becomes prohibitive. In some ways, Google and Facebook can do it, so maybe they should do it. But if entrepreneur from some of the emerging countries, like I take part in the education of entrepreneurs in some of the Southeast Asian countries, and they have very high level of skills, and this very respectable. And yet, when the market is very fragmented, the entrepreneurs, these up and coming small entrepreneurs, has to pay the cost of customizing their service to each country. That becomes prohibitive, right? So I would like to give opportunities for the internet entrepreneurs of the world an open and accessible market, so that any entrepreneurs with aspiration on the internet, regardless of where they live, has a global market in front of them.
Yeah, let me just reinforce that a bit by just throwing out an idea that we've kicked around quite a bit at KAO. And it comes back when you think about how the European Union integrated after the Second World War. What they found were a couple of areas where countries shared very, very fundamental economic interests. They organized around coal and steel and nuclear power. And gradually, by working together in the economic field, they expanded their political cooperation, even developed a certain amount of a security presence. Question is, if you look at the new coal, steel, and nuclear power in terms of the global economy and the Asian economy, it's now data. And so the conditions under which you share data and protect it are really, really fundamental to the innovation and growth that you're going to be getting from the internet. And certainly in Asia, one of the paradoxes of Asia is it is going to be the center of the internet, and yet it's highly balkanized. The US certainly coming together in the countries close by with one set of framework based on the market for dealing with privacy issues. The Europeans, they're the 800-pound gorilla that we haven't talked about, are very much moving in an opposite direction. It's very, very top-down, it's very community-oriented, it's less business-friendly, it could be highly costly, and yet one of the principles of Europe is that whatever we do, you have to do. There's a certain extraterritoriality assertions that they're making in terms of compliance with their codes for companies that want to offer services even from outside Europe. And the question is, to what extent can putting together common rules in the area of internet policy, privacy is a good starting point, cybersecurity standards are another, net neutrality is competition issues are a third. To what extent can this kind of propel, shape Asian integration? Not that integration on the order of Europe is possible. It's a very, very diverse and much more politically different situation. But on the other hand, it's a huge opportunity. And there are frameworks for that in the context of ASEAN, in the context of APEC, in the context of TPP. And it'd be very, very interesting to see the role the internet plays in this regard. Yes. Again, if you give your name and your affiliation and who you'd like to speak with.
Jeff Fogel, retired prosecutor. In view of the fact that this conversation wouldn't even mention NSA not that long ago, what confidence do we have that there's not yet another shoe to drop or additional revelations, particularly something along the line perhaps of commercial security market benefit from surveillance and so on, something about abuse of the governance role or abuse of the surveillance products that hasn't come out yet? And where would that leave your efforts, number one? And number two, I guess particularly to Mr. Harris, is the State Department determined that in fact there are no such revelations to be had, and otherwise is everyone kind of wasting their time because it's all going to tip over when those revelations come? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So I'm afraid I can't directly answer that. I don't have an answer to give you there, but my colleagues here might have some thoughts.
I'll just say I think it's very likely that there's more revelations to come. Given the number of documents that are out there, and we've seen the story hasn't gone away. There have been new ones now. Whether or not there are other announcements that have as big of an impact as the past ones, I think remains to be seen. There's no way to know. But I don't think it would be difficult, I think, for U.S. Standing in, especially in these international fora on internet governance, to decline much more than it already has. I mean, I think we're pretty low right now. We don't have the cooperation of even allies that we had recently. Now, my colleague here has been working very hard to change that. And I mean, as one who enjoys the internet, I appreciate that because I think that's needed. I think the State Department can only do so much, though, right? I mean, ultimately, the change that people want to see in this area is in the intelligence community, and so the individuals who are, I think, on the ground right now in these negotiations, trying to make this change over here on internet governance and what it means for our commercial interests long term, aren't the ones that are setting the policy, and I think that's a problem. I think that's that problem that the economic interest and the commercial interests of the United States weren't part of the national security intelligence decisions is why we are here in the first place. And I don't see that that's changed, so that's a problem going forward.
Yeah, and so, the question aside of additional revelations, you made a point, Dan, earlier about fundamentally the surveillance issues and internet governance issues being separate. And we fully believe that, and it's something we've stated publicly. And so what that leaves for folks in my shoes and the team that I'm working with is it just lends us the opportunity to redouble down on our effort and our commitment to multi-stakeholder internet governance. And that's what we intend to do, whether or not there's more that comes out, and however long this lasts, we are going to continue to be as strident as we can in speaking in favor of the current system and working to improve it, strengthen it, make it more inclusive. So that's what we'll be doing from our end.
Okay, some additional questions? Yeah, please.
Good morning. My name is Grace Clegg, and I'm from the East-West Center in Washington. Again, I brought this up at one of the panels I attended for USJI yesterday, in which I really appreciate the opportunity to hear more about what the U.S. and Japan is doing together on issues beyond Futenma, beyond Abenomics, and beyond the typical sort of talks that we have around DC. So thank you, gentlemen, for sharing on a topic I've learned a lot about in the past hour or so. But my question is beyond presenting a united front, so to speak, in international fora on what the U.S. and Japan believe is the correct place to go in governance, what are some of those smaller issues that we've been able to work out bilaterally? What sort of areas have we cooperated on? Do we have, for instance, agreements, or have we done things involving spam or cybersecurity? What are some of the things we've already accomplished, and what are the next things on the plate? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. One of the things that I was focused on and working on when I was working more closely on US-Japan issues was on cloud computing. And this is an area where both the US and Japan have significant economic opportunity and significant reason to cooperate closely to make sure that we have regulatory environments that are interoperable, that will make sure that our companies have the opportunity to do business across borders and that data can flow freely. And so we set up a working group of our Internet Economy Dialogue that was intended to focus specifically on cloud computing issues. And we did a number of meetings, both in person and through video conferencing, which meant some very late nights for me at State Department, but where we went through a number of issues and trying to share information on best practices and coordinate on standard setting to make sure that we were on the same page in international bodies. We also tried proactively in working through our embassy to one of the issues that has stood in the way of some of our cloud computing efforts has to do with misunderstandings about the Patriot Act. And so we worked through Embassy Tokyo to put on an event to help let folks in Japan, in Tokyo, that are interested in the cloud computing business to understand some of the intricacies of that law and what it does and doesn't do, and why it's continued to be safe to work with Google and Microsoft and all the other, Amazon, all the other cloud providers from the United States. And so that's one issue where I was involved closely. Privacy's been mentioned many times, and clearly that that's an area where there's a need for continuing conversation, and I know it's going on. But with respect to privacy, we're lucky enough to have the APEC cross-border privacy rule system that both the U.S. and Japan are engaged in, trying to grow that regionally. And so that's an area where the U.S. and Japan are both trying to push something forward that'll help with these cross-border regulatory issues.
Yeah, let me jump in a little bit on that, because that's nearly 100% of what I do in Tokyo. I'm the senior advisor to the Internet Economy Task Force in the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. And the dialogue has been tremendous for us in addressing a whole range of issues. I mean, right now, for example, specifically, we're engaged in talking with the Japanese government as it begins to elaborate its privacy framework and how that's going to change. And in that particular context, too, U.S. and Japanese companies have been collaborating together to watch carefully how the EU is beginning to elaborate their data protection directive. So that's been very, very key. We've been working together as well on trying to get more unlicensed white space into the market. That's areas of spectrum that have been freed up by the transition from analog to digital broadcasting, and that's a huge commercial opportunity. We've had discussions with them on data transfer policies, so that they had export control regulations that made it difficult for companies to transfer data. It's a technical issue, but that's actually been resolved. We've been talking to them quite a bit about content storage and revisions to the copyright law that will allow a transient catching of data so that people can store their music or their videos online. So there's a huge, huge range of practical sorts of issues that we've been talking and working with them on together. Another important area has been clearly cybersecurity. I think all of us got a wake-up call, I guess last March, when basically a number of banks and broadcasting facilities were taken down in Korea. Subsequently, of course, has been the major leak of credit card information in Korea. I think it's all brought us to a clear understanding of how, security involves as well protection of critical infrastructure. There's been a lot of collaboration between the Department of Homeland Security, elements of the Japanese government, and that's actually beginning to encourage a consolidation of authority and roles and missions within the Japanese government, between defense, between METI, between the Cabinet Office, between the Ministry of Communications, in terms of organizing themselves to deal with this area. So it's enormously productive. The internet governance is obviously a key and I think a very future part of our operation. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I think what we've done is, as I said, created some specific things that we can work on. You'll see a document coming out in another week or so that kind of benchmarks where we've been over the past couple of years, particularly in areas like privacy, cybersecurity, capacity building. That's another key area where we're talking about the U.S. and Japan cooperating, particularly in areas of Asia. But we're also focusing on the future, and 2020, it's kind of coincidental, the Abe government came out in June of last year with their IT strategy plan. They picked 2020 as the year that they wanted to put together a whole new series of initiatives. It's also the year the Olympics are coming to Tokyo, so we've jumped on that. We're talking about how Tokyo and indeed Japan become a more of a model for connectivity and for very, very vibrant and open internet economy, particularly in the area of content. So a lot is going on. There's a tremendous convergence between the interests of U.S. and Japanese companies in this area. And I agree, as somebody who used to manage Futenma, as somebody who spent maybe 20 years negotiating everything from oranges and beef to cell phones to automobiles, I'm glad that there's something else to talk about in the U.S.-Japan relationship, and I think that it's very, very encouraging.
That document is an ACCJ document. It's going to come out in a couple of weeks.
Actually, it's a great question, Scott. I mean, I think one of the most interesting things that's been over the past 4 or 5 years is the relationship that's now developed between ACCJ and Keidanren. We've got a U.S.-Japan Internet Economy Industry Forum, jointly operated by Keidanren and the ACCJ, and it'll be a joint document between the two of us.
That's what we
and they've become much less painful to negotiate over the last 4 years. I was sharing a copy of what we have with Jiro the other night. It's interesting, right? We're getting there. I think we got 1 minute left. Yes, gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Shinichi Sobe with CSIS Japan Chair. Thank you very much for a great discussion today. My question is, I think, regarding to the cyber security or cyber crime. I think there are so much worries about threats of trade secret theft by China these days, and also the Chinese internet device manufacturers like Huawei, ZTE is expanding the business all over the world. And often in the United States, the CFIUS is blocking when Chinese companies try to buy US companies. But I don't think most of the Asian countries have an organization like CFIUS, so do we have to think about building such kind of organization in the Asian countries, or are we worrying too much against Chinese threats? Thank you very much.
I mean, I think I don't want to sort of target China specifically. I think we need to. We do need. I mean, like many of the hidden technologies sort of behind. I mean, and that probably applies to some of the American products as well. Becomes source of concern. for everybody around the world. And we would very much like to have a mechanism so that these things are tested with neutral eyes. And we would also like to have to give all the countries or all the people around the world choice of purchasing things from sources where they trust. And if China is a concern, it's probably because the Chinese domestic market is so huge that they have a huge economy of scale, that with sheer power of economy of scale, they perhaps become the sole source of certain kinds of products. Then the kinds of concern that you have may become more apparent. So I mean, I think I think one, we probably don't want to target any specific countries. I mean, to be an alarmist. But two, we nevertheless would very much like to see some, I mean, neutral bodies, watching the technologies so that any questionable codes will be revealed. Yeah.
Any additional comments? Listen, I want to thank everybody. I probably don't need to remind you, but hold on, I need my prompter. This is what we're talking about in terms of the internet governance, because there's more computing power here in this small phone than there was in a room this size, only 20, 25 years ago. And not only does this have enormous computing power, I can tap into mainframe computers, data centers, and others that are enormously huge, enormously fast. And I can pick up this in a minute and talk to my wife in Tokyo. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the convenience, the efficiency, but at the same time, the power and the issues that are raised by this. So thank you very much, and I think this is a real area for U.S.-Japan cooperation, and thank you very much for coming.